All right, guys. So we're picking up with period 4, part 2, and dealing with the administration of Andrew Jackson. And there's really three big events to Jackson's presidency you need to know. The first is going to be the Tariff of Abominations, or the Tariff of 1828. The fight over the national bank with Nicholas Biddle, and then Indian removal. So the first we're going to deal with is the Tariff of Abominations. Called that because it was seen from the point of view of the South as being devastating to them. Now, just as kind of a little review. Remember, a tariff is a tax that is placed on an imported good. So if somebody sells something in this country, in America, from another country, the price of it is going to be raised a little bit because the foreign country has to pay a tax for the privilege of selling it here. So what happens is in 1828, a tariff is passed to protect American industry because American industry will be able to charge a little bit lower prices for their goods that are equivalent to foreign goods. So what happens out of this is the Northeast benefits from this because that's where a majority of our manufacturing is at. Now, at the same time that it's benefiting the North, it's hurting the South because the South exports a lot of their goods, particularly cotton. So they're going to get caught in the midst, or they could get caught in the midst of what's called a trade war, where foreign countries will put tariffs on American goods coming in, and then Southern planters won't get as much money for their cotton as they would previously. So you get this huge debate between the North and the South on whether this tariff is good. Well, you've got two sides for it. The South obviously comes out against it, and what they threaten to do is nullify the law. In other words, not follow it. And the spearhead, or the guy who leads the charge for nullification, is John C. Calhoun, and he puts his viewpoints in writing with a work you need to be aware of called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest, where he comes out with all the reasons why this law basically was not good, I guess is the best way to put it. In opposition to that, the people who were against South Carolina nullifying the law, it comes to light in the Webster-Hayne Debate, in which Daniel Webster, who was from the North, forcefully objects to nullification. He says that everybody's benefited from it. You need to keep the nation together, I guess is the best way to put it. So what happens? South Carolina nullifies the law. They threaten to secede from the United States or pull themselves out of the United States of America. And in response to that, Jackson threatens to send the military or the Navy down there to enforce this tariff. In other words, they're going to catch boats before they get into South Carolina and still charge the tax. A couple of things come out of it. Really, the big one is the force bill, which is passed. Obviously, things calm down. South Carolina doesn't secede from the Union, not yet anyway. And then things settle down, but Jackson gets past what's called the force bill, which says the president has the ability to use the military to enforce a law. All right, our next event is going to be the Bank War, which was between Andrew Jackson and the lead, the president of the National Bank, Nicholas Biddle. And kind of what it boils down to, guys, is the National Bank has to come up for what's called recharter every certain number of years. And Jackson was completely against the National Bank. He felt that it was made strictly for the privilege of people in the Northeast, wealthy merchants and bankers and people like that, and it really didn't help the common man out. Didn't help the common man out, which goes back to the tenets of Jacksonian democracy. So what happens is it comes up for recharter during his administration. And what he does is he vetoes the charter. He says, no, there will no longer be a national bank. And what it kicks off is this huge argument between Jackson and Biddle over whether the national bank should survive. Really, the biggest thing out of it is going to be the consequences of it. In the midst of all this happening, what Jackson does is he supports the removal of federal deposits from the Bank of the United States. In other words, people drawing their money out or states drawing their money out. It also, what it does, it causes an expansion in credit. In other words, people are loaning more money by state banks, or what we're referred to as pet banks. These state banks would regulate money on a scale they hadn't seen before, and what ends up happening out of that is you end up with an economic event called the Panic of 1837, because these banks were loaning money kind of willy-nilly. I mean, that's a bad way to put it, but just they were loaning money to everybody, and these people didn't necessarily have an ability to pay it back, and what happens is the bank loses money and it has to shut down, and people who have their money deposited in that bank lose it. So it leads to a financial panic. And then one of the most important for our purposes, this is the one issue that really leads to strong opposition against Jackson. And it comes from a group of people who come to be known as a political party called the Whigs, W-H-I-G. And the Whigs are formed basically to oppose anything Andrew Jackson does. So if you were to compare and contrast this, if you know the things that Andrew Jackson stands for, you can figure out what the Whigs stand for, because it's going to be completely different than what he wants. All right, so the third event of the Jacksonian administration is going to be Indian removal and the Trail of Tears. Kind of how this gets kicked out, or how this gets going, is white settlers are starting to move into the southeast at a pretty much unprecedented rate. People are wanting land to plant cotton and things like that, and obviously there's Native Americans living on these lands. So what they begin to do is they start to try to kick them out. And the Cherokee Nation, which is a little bit different than the rest of native tribes, is they actually mount a court case to stop this informal removal, I guess you could call it, of them from their lands. And it makes its way all the way up to the Supreme Court in a case known as Worcester versus Georgia. And in Worcester versus Georgia, John Marshall declares, remember, we're going back to the Marshall Court, we're still in that period, he declares that the Cherokees can stay. Okay, so he upholds their petition or their court case, their argument. He says, yes, they are, citizens. They can stay here. Well, maybe not citizens, but they can stay on their lands. Well, Andrew Jackson, who doesn't really have the best relationship throughout his life with Native Americans through battles and hostilities and things like that, comes out with a statement that John Marshall, if he wants this law, he can enforce it. In other words, he's saying he's not going to abide by Justice Marshall's ruling. So what ends up happening is the military goes down and they forcibly remove the Cherokee from their lands. And as they move them from there, they're going to be relocated to reservations in Oklahoma. So it's kind of hard to see, I'll grant you on this, but this route that they take from the southeast to Oklahoma is referred to as the Trail of Tears because it was a forced removal. There were a lot of deaths on the way due to sickness and just exhaustion and things like that. Very sad, very sad moment in U.S. history. Let's see, up to the point where a quarter of the participants died on this journey. So be able to associate the forced removal of Cherokees and the Trail of Tears with Jackson as well. All right, so we move forward from Jackson to transportation and industry, kicking it off with the transportation revolution. Now, there are some new developments in transportation at this time that leads to it being known as a revolution. And the three words you need to associate with everything we talk about for the next couple of minutes is quicker, easier, and cheaper. And these developments that you see listed right here do those things. Okay, first of all, it's going to be the steam engine. The next is the Erie Canal, and the next is railroads. In other words, we're able to get products and people from one place to another within this country faster and cheaper than we ever have before. The consequence of it is that the East and the West is finally linked. So you can get that movement and migration of people. You can get that movement of products agriculturally or manufactured from one place to another on a scale that you haven't seen up to this point. Now, in the midst of all this, we have what's known as the Texas Fight for Independence. Now, just briefly the background of it and stuff. Stephen F. Austin leads a group of American settlers down to the Texas Territory, which at this time is a part of Mexico. And when they get there, they become upset by a couple of things. One, the Mexican government doesn't allow slavery. And also, if the Mexican government had a law that said if you migrate to the Texas Territory, you had to convert to Catholicism. So as soon as they get there, they're kind of looking for a way to get out. And when I say get out, I mean out of Mexican control. So what eventually happens as a result of these misgivings and these problems that settlers in Texas have with the Mexican government, they declare their independence. And what ends up happening is military battles ensue. And they begin to appeal to America they declare their independence and then they appeal to be a part of America, but that comes a little bit down the line. In the midst of these battles, this is where the Alamo comes in which a group of settlers who were fighting for the independence were defeated by Mexican forces at the Alamo. Eventually what happens is the Mexican commander, who is Santa Anna, eventually surrenders because they're just not equipped to put down this little rebellion, and what is called the Lone Star Republic is established by the independent settlers of Texas. Now we go all the way up into 1845. This happens in 1836. It's 1845 before Texas comes into the Union as a state, but this is the process that kicks off Texas becoming a member of the United States. All right, so we shift over from that. I realize there's a lot of bouncing around, and there's going to be in these periods. It's one of those it is what it is things, but we transition over from Texas independence to reforms and artistic and literary movements and stuff like that. So the first two you need to be aware of are Transcendentalism and Utopias because they both happen within this period. Transcendentalism is a philosophical and literary movement that advocates a simple life, finding truth in nature, getting back to your roots, and things like that. It comes out of some of the attitudes of the times that life was moving too fast and there's too much progress and all this, and that you need to just bring it back a little bit and go down to the basics. Utopias are communes or communities set up to have a different life. All right, the three you need to be associated with are Brook Farm, New Harmony, and Oneida. And really, with these utopias, what they're trying to do is they're trying to escape what they perceive to be the competitive life that is appearing in America. And it's because of these transportation revolutions and the factory system and all that kind of stuff. They want to go back to a simpler life as well. They want to be able to guide moral behavior, and they want to have more of a cooperative, communal lifestyle. And that's really what it boils down to, is escaping from the competitiveness that is coming from these changes in society and the government, or in the economy. So we move from there to religious and social reform. Now, we've talked about the First Great Awakening before, and you're going to need to do some comparisons within that with this, what is called the Second Great Awakening. You need to be able to associate the leaders of each. The two leading figures of this one were Charles Finney and Lyman Beecher. Now, the similarity is, really the similarities are that it all deals with the fire and brimstone aspect that we talked about during the First Great Awakening. It's a way to rekindle religious spirit. It's a way to refire it. A term you might see associated with it is called the Burned Over District, which was a section of Western New York where these fire and brimstone speeches and sermons happened, and it was a wave of religious revival. You had the same ways of spreading the message as before, with traveling or what's called itinerant preachers going around to the states and performing these sermons and stuff like that. Now, although we talked about in the First Great Awakening how it was the first mass movement in American history, this one is kind of the same, but it's a little bit different in the fact that what it did is it brought attention to more than just the religious aspect of it. Like, eventually it gets tied into the abolitionist movement in an attempt to get rid of slavery. Also, with some of the issues that were facing women during this time. And the reason for that is because, unlike the First Great Awakening, in this one, women and African Americans played a more prominent role in spreading the message and making this happen. Alright guys, to wrap up part 2 of this very briefly, we'll discuss the role of women during this period, and what it boils down to is two basic terms: the cult of domesticity and Republican motherhood. Now, Republican motherhood came about, I've got those in reverse order here, but Republican motherhood ties back to the end of the Revolutionary War, where it was seen, or it was told to women that their role in this new republic was to raise the next generation of citizens, of virtuous Republican citizens. So, to help them feel as they were a part of the process of the new country, they put this responsibility on them, saying it's yours to raise the next generation. In this period, we have the cult of domesticity, which ties into the woman's role in the home. And it's another way to kind of, I don't know, I guess keep women from striving to be in political and economic social life to a certain extent, but it's giving them a responsibility for the progression, for the greatness of the country. And it's saying that in the cult of domesticity, women should they should take care of the moral, religious family structure, okay? Their job is to take care of everything at home. And I'm not talking cooking, cleaning, things like that, although that was a part of it. I'm talking about the moral fiber of your family and the way that they act and the way that they treat others. So it's putting responsibility on them while at the same time trying to keep them out of what we're seeing as men's domains at that time. All right, this wraps up part 2, guys. It's going to take a little while to go through all this. I'm trying to do it as quickly as possible, but next time we'll pick up with part 3 of period 4.